The Comanche warrior had once stood at the center of his people, his name carried on the wind like a song of thunder. He had earned his place among the fiercest riders of the plains, his bow steady, his lance sure, his courage unquestioned. But pride and principle had carried him into conflict with his chief, a clash of wills that ended with the worst fate a Comanche could suffer: banishment. To live apart from the tribe was to be severed from the heartbeat of the earth itself, from the kinship of blood and spirit. It was a punishment worse than death. Yet here he was, alive, walking the spaces between worlds, carrying the weight of dishonor on his broad shoulders. Every night the warrior dreamed of the fire circle, where laughter once rose and drums kept time with the stars. He dreamed of his mother's voice, of the fierce camaraderie of his brothers, and the wild gallop of horses across endless prairie.
Waking each dawn was like tearing open a wound that never closed.
The exile had stolen not only his people, but the very rhythm of his life. In the silence of banishment, he heard only the whispers of ghosts. Still, he survived. His hands, trained for war and hunting, knew how to coax fire from damp wood, how to track deer across stony ground, how to sleep light as a wolf. But surviving was not the same as living. The ache of solitude pressed against him like a weight too heavy to carry, yet he carried it all the same. He spoke to no one, for there was no one to hear. His voice, once strong in song and battle cry, felt foreign even to him. He wandered to the edge of a foreign settlement, a place of wooden fences, smoke-stained cabins, and narrow-eyed men who tightened their grips on rifles when his shadow lengthened near. They saw in him only danger, a wild creature better driven away than understood. He did not fault them. He knew what he looked like to them: braided hair, weathered skin, the sharp, wary stance of one trained to fight. To their world, he was not a man but a warning. And so he remained unseen, watching from the shelter of trees, a silent ghost, haunting the edges of their lives. But even in hiding, his presence was a storm waiting to break. His heart still carried fire, though it lay smoldering beneath layers of bitterness and grief. He told himself he needed nothing more than the open sky, the rhythm of his own breath, and the steady pulse of the earth beneath his feet. Yet, beneath that hardened shell, there was a hollowness, a yearning he could not silence. The warrior often walked at twilight, when the sky bled gold into purple, when shadows stretched long and the day's noise settled into murmurs. These hours reminded him of the old ways, when warriors spoke with ancestors through the colors of the dying sun. He lifted his gaze to the heavens, asking for answers, but the stars were silent. Perhaps they too had turned their backs on him. It was during one such twilight walk that he first sensed the shift in the air, as if the world itself was stirring toward some unseen meeting. He did not yet know that eyes would soon meet his own, eyes unafraid of the exile's shadow. He did not yet know that his solitude was already beginning to fracture, that the path of exile was not meant to remain a lonely road forever. For now, he was simply the outcast, the man stripped of name and belonging, drifting between a people who despised him and a people who had cast him out. And yet, the earth beneath his moccasins hummed as if whispering, "You are not finished." The settlement carried with it the scent of wood smoke, tanned hides, and hard labor. It was a place of survival as much as the wilderness surrounding it, though its people prided themselves on calling it civilization. For most, the town offered structure, safety, and belonging. For her, however, it felt more like a cage built from watchful eyes and whispered judgments. She had lived there for years and yet had never quite belonged. Her name was whispered in corners, always with the same tone, half pity, half disapproval. Some called her too bold, others too peculiar. She was not the sort of woman who bowed her head meekly, nor did she blend in with the other wives and daughters whose worth was measured by obedience and silence. She asked questions when none should be asked, laughed when laughter was deemed unseemly, and carried herself with a quiet independence that unsettled her neighbors. That independence, however, came with a heavy price: loneliness. She lived on the edge of town, in a modest house that had been her father's before sickness took him, with no husband to claim her and no children to tether her to the rhythms of domestic life. She often walked alone, fetching her own water, tending her own firewood, and seeing to her own affairs. To some, this was scandalous. To her, it was survival. Yet behind the mask of strength, she felt the emptiness of having no one with whom she could truly speak. That it was near the well, beneath the slow arc of the moon, that she first felt the sensation of being watched. Her hands, roughened by chores, paused over the bucket's handle. She lifted her head, heart pounding in her throat, eyes scanning the tree line beyond the settlement's fence. For a breathless moment, the shadows seemed to shift, as if something or someone stood just beyond the edge of sight. She could not see clearly, but she felt it, a presence silent and vast. Whispers had reached her, the same way they always did. The townsfolk muttered about a savage lurking near the woods, an outcast Indian who had been seen at twilight, a figure who brought bad omens. The men spoke of danger, rifles leaning at their doors. The women clutched their children closer and recited prayers. But she did not feel danger, not in that first lingering sense of being seen. Instead, she felt curiosity, sharp and undeniable, laced with a strange pull she could not name. Her path crossed with his eyes for the first time days later. She had wandered farther than usual, basket in hand, gathering herbs near the river's edge. When she rose from kneeling, she saw him standing across the water, framed by wild grasses and fading light. He was still as stone, his gaze fixed on her, not with menace, but with something heavier, more complex. She froze, every instinct urging her to flee back toward the safety of the settlement. Yet her feet refused to move, the air between them stretched taut, charged with an energy she had never felt before. His eyes, dark as midnight, held both weariness and defiance, like a man carrying a lifetime of battles within him. She should have turned away, and yet she did not. She could not. Something within her, something unspoken and secret, longed to keep looking. When their gaze finally broke, it was not by her choice but by his. With a slow, deliberate motion, he turned and melted back into the trees, leaving her breath shallow and her heart racing. She stood there for long minutes afterward, clutching her basket as if it could anchor her, knowing that her world had shifted in some subtle but irreversible way. In the days that followed, she found herself searching the woods at twilight, drawn to the shadows as though expecting him to emerge. The settlement's warnings echoed in her ears, but they could not drown out the strange pull inside her. She told herself she was foolish, reckless even, to invite danger by lingering near the edge of the unknown. But loneliness has a way of stripping caution bare, and her heart whispered what her mind dared not admit. She wanted to see him again, did not yet understand why. All she knew was that for the first time in years she felt alive, not for her chores, not for the town's judgment, but because in the depths of the forest someone had looked at her as if she were more than invisible. It was an afternoon heavy with heat, the kind that pressed down on the skin and made every sound seem sharper in the stillness. The woman had walked farther than usual from the settlement, her basket swinging lightly in her hand as she picked wild herbs along the narrow trail. She told herself it was only for the sake of gathering more, but in her heart she knew she had been wandering with hope, that same strange hope that had haunted her since the river, the hope that she might see him again. The trail narrowed near a thicket, and her skirts brushed against the dry grass as she stepped carefully. She heard the distant rush of hooves, a horse running free, or perhaps one that had broken loose from the settlement. Then came the sound of shouting, a man's angry, drunken voice echoing between the trees. She stiffened. Before she could retreat, the figure of a townsman stumbled into view, a bottle dangling from his hand, his eyes glassy with liquor. "Out here alone?" He slurred, his mouth twisting into a crooked smile. "Not wise for a lady." Her stomach tightened. She stepped back, clutching her basket, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I'm on my way home." But he moved closer, the smell of whiskey thick around him. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. She jerked, trying to wrench free. But his grip was iron. "Always thought you were too proud, walking around like you don't need anyone. Maybe you just need the right man to show you." His words dripped with menace. Fear lanced through her, quick and cold, but before she could cry out, a shadow fell across them both. A hand, strong and swift, clamped down on the drunk's shoulder, yanking him backward with such force that he staggered. She turned, and her breath caught. It was him. The Comanche warrior stood tall, his presence like a storm breaking open the sky. His eyes burned with a quiet, controlled fury, and though he said nothing, the weight of his silence was louder than any threat. The drunk man blinked up at him, his bravado faltering under the intensity of that gaze. He mumbled something incoherent, before stumbling back toward the trail, disappearing into the trees with his bottle clattering at his side. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. She stood frozen, heart pounding, wrist still tingling where the man had grabbed her. The warrior remained close, his body angled slightly as if to shield her from any lingering danger. For the first time, she could see him clearly, the sharp lines of his face, the strength in his posture, the weariness etched into his features. "You," she began, but her voice faltered. His eyes flicked to hers, steady and unreadable. Then, in a voice rough as gravel, yet carrying a strange gentleness, he asked, "Why do you look at me without fear?" The question struck her like an arrow. Without fear? She realized in that moment that he was right. Her heart raced, but it wasn't fear that drove it. It was something else, something deeper, more dangerous. She tried to find words, but none would come. How could she explain that she had been searching for him, longing for that unspoken connection she had felt? Since the river? How could she admit that the very sight of him filled the hollow places within her with a warmth she could not name? "I don't know," she whispered at last, the truth trembling in her voice. A flicker passed through his eyes, surprise, perhaps even relief, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He gave a short nod, then stepped back, as if putting distance between them was safer. For him, for her, for whatever unspoken bond had sparked in that moment. She wanted to thank him, but the words felt too small, too fragile to bridge the gulf between them. Instead, she simply stood there, breath shallow, watching him as he melted back into the trees with the same quiet grace as before, and yet this time was different. This time, she knew he had chosen to step into her world, if only for a heartbeat. He had saved her, yes, but more than that, he had seen her and demanded in his own way to know why she saw him too. As she made her way back to the settlement, the memory of his voice lingered in her ears, echoing again and again. "Why do you look at me without fear?" She had no answer, and yet she understood that her silence was its own confession. Something had begun, fragile as a thread, yet strong enough to bind them. Neither of them could deny it now. The first time they truly spoke, it was not by design. She had ventured farther than usual to the river, her heart telling her that he might be there, though her mind scolded her for hoping. She filled her bucket slowly, stalling for no reason she dared admit. And then, in the hush of the fading afternoon, she felt it again, that presence, steady and watchful. She did not turn at once, but she knew he was there. When at last she lifted her head, he stepped from the trees. Not suddenly, not like a predator stalking prey, but with deliberate calm, as though giving her every chance to run. She did not. Instead, she stood rooted where she was, her heart pounding as his dark gaze met hers. "You came back," she whispered before she realized she had spoken. His brows drew together as if puzzled by her tone. "You are not afraid." "You keep asking that," she said softly, the hint of a smile tugging at her lips, though her hands trembled around the bucket. "Why should I be?" He studied her for a long moment, his silence heavy but not threatening. At last he said, "My people cast me out. Your people would kill me if they could. And still, you stand here." There was no boast in his words, only fact. She swallowed, lifting her chin with quiet resolve. "Because you are not what they say." For a long time, that was enough. Their conversations, if they could be called that, were scattered across days, stolen in fragments of twilight and shadow. He never came too close at first, as though testing the air between them for danger. She never pressed him with questions, though her heart burned with them. Instead, they spoke in fragments, each word carrying more weight than whole speeches could. She learned he had once been a warrior of great skill, though he did not boast of it. He spoke of betrayal in vague terms, someone who had turned against him, a decision that had cost him his place among his people. He did not share names, and she did not ask. She sensed the wound was deep, and some wounds are not to be prodded open by idle curiosity. In turn, she confessed her own exile of sorts, not cast out, but never truly accepted. She spoke of her father, of the way the town had never looked at her the same after he died, of how she had learned to live with whispers, of how the silence of her little house felt heavier than any scolding tongue. His eyes softened at that, just slightly. "Lonely," he said, as if testing the word on his tongue. "Yes," she admitted, "lonely." Sometimes their talks were only a handful of words exchanged by the riverbank, but even that was enough to set her heart racing. Sometimes they sat in the hush of the trees, the firelight flickering between them when he allowed her to share his camp. The silence between their words was never empty, it was full, humming with something unspoken yet undeniable. As days turned to weeks, trust began to grow, fragile as a sapling yet rooted in honesty neither had found elsewhere. She began to notice how his voice changed when he spoke of the open plains, of the wild horses that thundered across the horizon. She heard the ache in him when he mentioned his people, even without naming them. And he noticed how her face lit when she laughed freely, as if the sound surprised even her. Yet always there lingered the shadow of danger. If anyone from the settlement discovered them together, the consequences would be swift and merciless. A woman seen with a man like him would be branded a traitor, and for him, exile would become death. They both knew this, though neither spoke it aloud. Instead, what passed between them was not danger, but something sharper, more fragile yearning. Each word spoken by firelight brought them closer. Each look across the river carried a question unspoken. Each night she returned home, her breath carried the memory of his nearness, as though he had already touched her though he had not. The air between them thickened with it, with the question neither dared give voice to yet. How long could they continue to meet, to talk, without the silence breaking into something more? It was inevitable that one day he would ask, and inevitable that she would have no words ready for the answer. The night was heavy with stillness, the kind that wrapped around every tree and stone until even the crickets seemed hesitant to break it. A fire flickered low in the hollow where he had built his camp, its glow painting the warrior's face in bronze and shadow. She sat across from him, her skirt tucked beneath her knees, her fingers curled loosely in her lap. The air smelled of smoke and wild sage, sharp and earthy, and the silence between them hummed like a living thing. Met often enough that her absence from the settlement drew murmurs, though she dismissed them. She told herself she was gathering herbs, visiting her father's old land, or simply walking alone to clear her thoughts. But the truth was harder to confess, even to herself. She came because she needed to. because the quiet she shared with him filled her more than the noise of the town ever could. Tonight, though the quiet felt different, thicker, charged, his eyes lingered on her more than usual, their dark depths steady and searching, as though he were waiting for something. She tried to meet his gaze and failed, her pulse thrumming in her throat. "You speak to me," he said suddenly, his voice low, carrying weight. "You laugh, though your people say I am nothing. You look at me as if—" He trailed off, shaking his head, the firelight catching in his braids. "As if what?" she asked softly. His eyes met hers then, holding them, refusing to release her. The world seemed to still around them, the fire's crackle fading into silence, the night itself leaning in to listen. His next words came slowly, each one deliberate, a question sharpened by restraint. "What if I touch you?" The words struck her like a wave, stealing her breath before her mind could catch up. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She stared at him, heart hammering, the world tilting in that single moment. It was not a demand, not a boast of conquest as the settlement's men might have spoken, but a plea wrapped in strength. He was not asking for permission to take, he was asking for permission to give. To cross the line both had danced around for weeks. Her breath caught in her chest, rising and falling too quickly. She felt it leave her lips, uneven, trembling, the sound louder than any word could have been. He noticed, she saw it in the flicker of his gaze, the subtle softening of his expression. Her silence was not rejection. It was answer enough. He shifted, slow as the turning of the earth, his hand lifting from his knee. It hovered in the space between them, broad and calloused, scarred by battles and survival, yet hesitant, trembling in a way that made her heart ache. His strength was undeniable, but here with her, it was gentleness that shone through. Her throat tightened. She could not look away. Her hand, resting on her skirt, trembled once, then stilled. It was not fear, at least, not the kind that warned her to flee. It was the kind of fear that comes when standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that to leap means never returning to what came before. Still, she did not pull away. The distance between his hand and hers closed by a breath. He did not yet touch, but the heat of him reached her skin, searing through fabric, through caution, through everything she thought she knew of herself. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking the silence. His gaze did not waver. "Because you see me, and I—" He hesitated, searching for words in a language that was not his first. "I cannot stop seeing you." Her chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath betraying her answer even if her lips could not form the words. She lowered her eyes, only to find them caught by his hand still hovering near hers, the question still burning in the air. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips, as though her body was already reaching before her will could decide. Fire crackled again, but softer, almost reverent. Between them, the silence deepened, no longer empty but brimming with the truth neither dared fully speak. She inhaled, sharp and shaky, and in that breath he found his answer. He did not move further, not yet. The restraint was there ironclad, though his eyes told her he had heard what her breath had confessed. And in that fragile, aching pause, something shifted forever. They could never return to the unspoken distance of before. For the first time. In years, perhaps for the first time in his life, he had asked not as a warrior but as a man. And for the first time, she had answered without words. Her breath had answered first. The days that followed were no longer the same. The air around her seemed to hold a secret glow, though no one else could see it. Every chore, every passing conversation in the settlement felt like a thin disguise draped over the truth she carried within her, that a Comanche exile had asked her a question only her breath had answered. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of seeping into the world. Whispers began to stir in the settlement. Someone claimed to have seen her wandering too often near the river. Another muttered about shadows in the trees, about the savage who had been spotted again. The drunk who had once grabbed her did not tell the full story of that night, but his shame festered into rumors. He muttered in the saloon that she was too friendly with danger, that she lingered too long where no decent woman should doubt at first. The words slid off her like rain. But soon she felt their weight pressing into her back with every step through town. Women pulled their children closer when she walked by. Men watched her with narrowed eyes, suspicion tightening their mouths. She had been an outsider before. Now she was something worse, someone to be feared, even despised. He, too, felt the shift. She told him nothing, yet he saw it in the way her shoulders stiffened when she came to him. He heard it in the tremble of her voice when she tried to laugh. "They know," he said one night, the firelight flickering across his face. It was not a question. She nodded, her throat too tight to answer. "They will come," he continued. "Men who fear what they do not understand. Men who think killing makes them safe." His eyes were steady, but there was no boast in them, only grim certainty. "Then I'll tell them the truth," she whispered fiercely, "that you saved me, that you harmed no one." A sad smile tugged at his lips. "They will not hear you. They hear only what fits their fear." His words rang true. The settlement was a place built on caution, on drawing lines between us and them. To them, he would always be danger, no matter what he did. And to love him, or even to be seen near him, was to invite that danger upon herself. Yet, even with that knowledge, she did not stop meeting him. If anything, their time together grew more precious, carved out from the shadows like forbidden jewels. She carried her basket less often, abandoning excuses. She came for him, and he knew it. Each night, the silence between them grew richer, more dangerous, every word and glance binding them closer. But the settlement's patience frayed. One evening, as she returned from the woods, she found two men waiting near her home. Their rifles rested casually against their shoulders, but the look in their eyes was sharp, hungry for accusation. "You wander too far," one said, spitting into the dirt. "People are saying things about you, about him." She forced her chin up, though her stomach clenched. "Say what you will," she replied. "I've done nothing wrong." "Wrong or not," the other man said, his voice low and threatening, "we don't want that savage near our town. You'd be wise to stay away, unless you aim to bring trouble to your own door." Her blood burned with fury, but she held her tongue until they left. Only then did she allow herself to shake, her hands trembling as she pushed her door closed. Trouble had already come, and it was not him, it was them. That night, when she found him, she told him everything. He listened without interruption, his face unreadable, though his eyes darkened with each word. At last he said, "If they come, I will fight." "No," she whispered, fear catching in her throat. "If you fight, they'll kill you, or worse." His jaw tightened. "I was a warrior before exile. I will not run like a hunted animal." She reached for him then, her fingers brushing the back of his hand. "I don't want you to fight. I just want you to live." Her touch silenced him. For a long moment, they sat in the firelight, their hands nearly joined, the weight of the world pressing down around them. They both knew the truth. Their bond had become a spark too bright to stay hidden. The settlement's suspicion would only grow sharper. Their moments together were no longer safe, and yet neither of them could turn back. The consequence of that single question, "What if I touch you?" was now unfolding. And the answer was written not only in her breath, but in the dangerous fire they had set blazing in a world that would not forgive them for it. The storm came sooner than either of them expected. It began with footsteps heavy, one's crunching across the brittle grass one evening when she had slipped away to the hollow. She had just reached the campfire's glow when the sound reached her ears. Her breath froze. He, already attuned to danger, stiffened like a wolf scenting hunters. He put a hand out, wordless, warning her to stay behind him. From the trees emerged 4 men, rifles slung carelessly but ready, their faces set with the grim confidence of those who believe themselves righteous. She recognized 2 from the settlement, including the drunk whose shame had festered into gossip. Their eyes flicked from her to the warrior, and satisfaction curled in their mouths. Her presence here had confirmed what they wanted most. Proof. "Well, look at this," one sneered. "Our suspicions were right. You've been keeping company with a savage." The words burned her cheeks, but before she could speak, the warrior stepped forward, his body a shield, his voice sharp and steady. "Go back. Leave now." The men laughed, though uneasily. Even they could sense the restrained power in him. "You don't give orders here," the drunk spat. "You should have kept to the woods. Now you'll answer for it." She moved forward then, standing at the warrior's side, her heart hammering but her voice firm. "He's done nothing to you. He's harmed no one. He saved me more than once. If you had any honor, you'd see the truth." But truth was not what they wanted. They wanted to protect their pride, their fear, their belief that danger could be controlled with a bullet. The men raised their rifles slightly. The threat clear dot in that heartbeat. The world split open. The warrior could have leapt forward, could have struck them down with the skill that still pulsed in his blood. His body remembered battles, his muscles burned for movement. And yet he hesitated. His exile had been born from violence, from a refusal to follow blindly into bloodshed. Would he now prove them right? Prove himself only capable of destruction? The choice cut deep. Fight and risk losing the fragile bond he had built with her, becoming the monster they claimed he was. Or hold back and risk their lives to the mercy of men who had none. She felt the tension in him, the coil of fury and restraint. Her hand, trembling but determined, found his. She gripped it tightly, her eyes lifting to meet his. "Don't," she whispered. "Not like this. Don't let them decide who you are." Her touch anchored him. His breath came rough, but he did not strike. Instead, he stood taller, his voice carrying the weight of defiance. "If you want me, you take me, but she is not yours to judge." The men exchanged looks, their bravado faltering for a moment under his calm, controlled power. One of them barked a curse and fired into the dirt near his feet, a warning shot that sent her flinching. The sound tore through the forest, scattering birds into the night sky. "Next one won't miss." The drunk growled. The warrior did not move. He held her hand in his, steady, refusing to let her see fear. His loyalty to her was clear in every line of his body. He would not abandon her, not even to save himself. She stepped forward then, her voice ringing with a courage she had never felt before. "If you want him, you'll have to take me too, because I will not leave his side." The declaration startled even the warrior. The men blinked, taken aback, their grip on certainty faltering. To stand with an exile was unthinkable. But here she was, daring them to brand her traitor, daring them to fire upon her as well. The standoff stretched, the fire snapping between them. The men muttered, uncertain now, their righteousness clashing with hesitation. Killing a Comanche exile was one thing. Shooting a woman of their own town in cold blood was another. At last, the drunk spat into the dirt again. "This isn't over. You'll regret your choice." They backed away, one by one, disappearing into the dark with threats hanging in the air like THUNDERCLOUDS. When the silence returned, she turned to him, her grip on his hand tightening. Her eyes shone with fear, but not regret. "I won't. Let them tear us apart. Not now." For the first time, he allowed himself to pull her into his arms, holding her close as if the act itself were defiance. His voice was rough in her hair. "Then we face what comes. Together." It was a trial neither had wanted, but it had revealed the truth of them both. His loyalty was no longer to a tribe that had cast him out, but to her. And hers was no longer to a town that had never embraced her, but to him. Together they had chosen. Dawn came quietly, spilling gold across the horizon as if the night before had not cracked the world open. The forest seemed to breathe again, though beneath its calm the memory of rifles, threats, and standoffs still hung heavy. She had not slept, her head resting against the warrior's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. That sound had been her anchor through the long hours, the proof that he was alive, that she had chosen rightly to stand with him. When she finally stirred, lifting her face to his, she found his eyes already open. He had kept watch, his body tense even in the silence of dawn. Yet when he looked at her, something softened. His hand brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, not as a question this time, but as if it had always belonged there. "They will come." "Again," he murmured. "I know," she whispered. Her throat tightened, but she did not look away. "Then let them." His brow furrowed, the weight of her words pressing into him. "You may lose everything." She reached for his hand, curling her fingers around it. "I've had nothing, not really." "Not until you." The truth of it stunned her even as it left her lips. For years she had lived as though she belonged nowhere, too outspoken for the women, too solitary for the men, too strange to fit into the quiet mold of the settlement. She had convinced herself she was strong because she could survive alone. But now, in the fire of his gaze, she realized strength was not in being untouched, it was in daring to be known. He seemed to understand, though he said nothing. Instead, he pulled her close again, his arms wrapping around her as if she were both shield and salvation. She pressed her face into his shoulder, inhaling the scent of smoke and earth, the scent of him. For the first time and longer than she could remember, her breath came steady, without tremor. Later, as the sun climbed higher, they walked together. Not toward the settlement, nor deeper into the woods, but along the border where the world seemed uncertain, unfinished. She knew that whichever way they turned, danger would follow. If they returned to the town, suspicion would fester into violence. If they wandered too close to Comanche lands, his own people might hunt him for breaking exile. Yet as their steps moved in rhythm, she felt none of the fear that should have consumed her. At one point, his hand brushed hers. The touch was slight, almost accidental. But unlike the night when he had asked, "What if I touch you?" this time there was no hesitation, no question hanging between them. His fingers curled around hers, firm and sure, sealing what had already been decided in breath and silence. She glanced at him, her heart swelling at the quiet certainty in his expression. No longer did he look only like the outcast, the exile, stripped of belonging. Standing beside her, he looked like a man who had chosen his path, not given by tribe or dictated by fear, but carved by love. They paused on a rise where the trees thinned, revealing the vast spread of prairie beyond. The horizon stretched endless, a ribbon of sky and land waiting for them. For him, it was the echo of freedom once lost. For her, it was the promise of a life finally lived on her own terms. "We can't go back," she said softly. "No," he agreed. His voice carried no sorrow, only resolve. "Then we go forward." He turned to her, his hand lifting to cradle her cheek. The touch was no longer hesitant, no longer bound by questions. She leaned into it, her breath warm against his palm. Her answer was no longer silence, no longer trembling, it was the steady, fearless rhythm of someone who had chosen. In that moment, exile was not a curse but a gift. It had stripped him of one world so that he might find another. It had left her untethered so she might choose her own place. Together they had become each other's belonging. As they stepped off the rise, Hand in hand, the prairie stretched wide before them. The road was uncertain, perhaps filled with hardship, perhaps with danger, but for the first time neither of them cared, because now every step was theirs, and when the wind whispered through the grass it carried not the sound of exile nor the echo of fear, but the promise born the night he had asked, "What if I touch you?" A promise her breath had answered first.